At once I can be clingy, and at once I can be pushing away.
That connection itself is also simultaneously dangerous. And, Bob, these two people get together all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
I did. Hi everyone, welcome back to our next video here on the Examined Life Daily. I'm Bob.
I'm Autumn.
And today we want to talk about attachment theory. This is a fairly new thing to me, and it is so logical. I mean, it is so common sense that you think, of course, why do you even have to teach this? It's obvious, and yet, we aren't aware of it, most of us. So to my mind, just being aware of all the ins and outs of attachment theory can be a life-changing event. Now, Autumn, you have spent a lot of time studying this because this is your profession.
Yes, very much so. I just absolutely loved this body of material. Learning about it, it's like all these lights came on and all of these patterns and layers of suffering that I'd either seen in my own life or I'd seen in the life of clients, they just made sense. And as a result of that clarity, there was a wonderful ability about how to make very conscious decisions while in relationship with other people and how we attach to them.
Right. It's so good. Tell us all about it.
Yes. So attachment theory comes from researchers John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. And it originally started with an infant study where they studied how infants responded to their caregivers in a variety of different circumstances. And what was discovered is the trusting availability or absence thereof, a caregiver, led to a certain degree of either distress or detachment in the infants. However, the way we experience attachment with our early caregivers, it lays a groundwork for how we attach to anyone, any being, even our dogs. Because attachment is essentially our sense of, do I trust in the stability of a relationship? Can I have a sense of self and still be connected to others? And so what John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth basically lined up was 4 different attachment styles, which we'll give an overview of those particular styles today. A point of hope right at the beginning of this isn't a lifelong diagnosis. You can absolutely change your attachment style. So this isn't fixed. We might have sort of tendencies toward one style, but it absolutely can change, which is why this material is so helpful.
Right. I think, again, I can't say it enough. The awareness of the tendency is enough for you to see, oh, this is why I'm doing this, and I can change it, and you really can.
Let's start with secure, because secure is sort of the pinnacle that we want to aim for. And the reason that that is the goal is we live a much better life with secure attachment. In adult relationships, if we had a secure base as an infant, we basically come in with this unconscious belief that people are safe, people return, and I can trust others. 2 core human needs: we need relationship. We need to connect to others. And we also are individual autonomous beings. So we need that ability to attach to others without losing ourselves in the process. So the 3 types of insecure attachment are anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, and something called disorganized or fearful avoidant attachment. Anxious attachment forms when there was inconsistent presence. Inconsistency is really the recipe for the strongest addictions. And oftentimes, anxious attachment has also been known as love addiction. And the reason for that is it's this sense of, I can trust that a relationship is there just enough, but it's also absent just enough that I kind of compulsively seek it. And I need a lot of reassurance that it isn't going away. And so the framework that happens in early childhood that could create anxious attachment is when maybe the caregivers just really have to work a lot. So when they're present, they're really with their children. But the demands, the economic demands of their lives might require them to be gone quite often. And so they don't have a consistent present force with their parent or caregiver. And so it generates actually a pretty strong sense of anxiety. It's this sense of, I need you, I want you, I get you enough to know how great it is when I have you, but also you're gone enough that I'm afraid that I'm not going to get you back. If you had kind of that set up for developing anxious attachment, you might experience relationships as your oxygen, almost this sense of, I need them to breathe. And as a result, your partner might experience you as overbearing, too intense, and that can be especially painful to hear when you're just wanting to connect, and another is like, whoa, this is a lot. And you might be prone to people pleasing. You might be prone to losing yourself and morphing yourself in order to make that relationship work. It can also be experienced as very highly controlling behaviors, because if there's a sense of, I need you to reassure me to let me know we're okay, and I need you to do all of these things in order for me to feel safe, that can be perceived as controlling, even if its origin is understandable. Now, on the flip side, we have avoidant attachment. Avoidant attachment really blooms from two different early childhood experiences. One is consistent neglect, where the infant basically learns, I cannot rely on my caregiver. They're simply not here. Others are not to be relied upon. And it just becomes kind of a matter of fact. It's developed so early in life that in adulthood, whenever that is our basis for avoidant attachment, it can almost be bewildering when people want to get close. It can feel good because it's like, oh, well, connection feels nice, but what the heck are you doing? And then your partners can experience you as cold, aloof, rigidly self-sufficient, maybe even needless or wantless. And that can be frustrating because it's almost like, okay, I'm really trying to connect, but there's just nothing there. Another basis for avoidant attachment is almost the extreme. Helicopter parents or extreme control can lead to avoidance. And there's a paradox here. Both neglect and extreme control are a form of abandonment. And a lot of times we might think, well, if somebody's hovering over us so much that we don't have space to breathe necessarily, how could that be abandonment? And the reason that it sort of paradoxically is very similar to neglect is, I'm not attuning to your needs. I'm attempting to force my needs. Sometimes I worry I'm a helicopter dog mom with Chloe and I've created an avoidant dog. I think there's truth to that. But it's like, in this effort to protect and shield you, there can be such strong engulfment that it really misattunes to the child's needs, and it's far more about calming and reassuring the parents. And so there is this layer of emotional neglect, even if there's physical presence. So both neglect and engulfment lead to avoidant attachment. And so someone with avoidant attachment in adulthood actually experiences relationships as suffocating. So whereas the person with anxious attachment experiences relationship as the oxygen, with avoidant attachment, you experience relationships as I can't breathe. And Bob, these two people get together all the time.
All the time.
All the time.
I did.
Yes, it's like two pieces of a puzzle. Freud would call this the repetition compulsion. Lots of different theories talk about how we recreate our childhood wounding, because by recreating it, that gives us an opportunity to either heal it or just re-traumatize ourselves.
I can't really find any fault with my mom or my dad. Like my father, like most men of his generation, wasn't as outgoing and loving and friendly as he should have been. But I remember a lot of really good times with my mom and my dad, and so I don't really understand it. But it's like you said with the helicopter mom, it looks like you're getting a lot of attention, but it can be just the opposite. Your response can be just the opposite. So it can be really confusing to understand. It is for me.
Context really matters, because I think context, it leads to both self-compassion instead of feeling flawed, as well as possibility. Disorganized attachment is the fourth category of attachment style, and that is in about 5 to 10% of the population. And that's when you kind of have a blend of both the anxious and avoidant. That is the type of attachment style that arises whenever somebody grows up in a pretty abusive situation with more trauma, more adverse childhood experiences. There's this longing and desire in seeking for connection, but that connection itself is also simultaneously dangerous. If you're in relationship with somebody who has disorganized, also known as fearful avoidant attachment, it can feel like a push-pull. It can feel like they're really into you one day and they've really backed off the next. And it can be very confusing. It's very painful for both parties.
When I study these and think about them, I do find myself being more disorganized than anything else. I can be at once, I can be clingy, and at once I can be pushing away. And so fear and anger can both be driving forces in my life, almost simultaneous and kind of opposing each other. That clinginess, I need you, I can't do without you, and that pushing away, don't smother me, don't cling too much. Just very disorganized.
Well, and I really appreciate you sharing that. In disorganized attachment, as you just described, closeness is sought, but it's also can be so threatening, even if it's not consciously registered that way. It's like, I want you, but no. And as a result, that can feel very much like having your foot both on the gas pedal and the brake. It feels like that yourself, as well as that's what it feels like for a partner. So it can be really difficult to know how to navigate that particular circumstance. It's absolutely navigatable. And that's why this material is so helpful, because without context and understanding, we just might be mad at somebody who's maybe doing a push-pull. However, if we can sort of understand it both ourselves if we're doing it, as well as if we have a loving, compassionate, patient partner, then we're able to work through those things together with sort of a framework and a language. Okay, so I want to share how each of the 4 styles reacts to intimacy, because that really is essentially what the foundation of attachment theory is. How do I react to intimacy? So for the secure attachment, intimacy is wonderful. There's a calmer sense of taking risks. There's a sense of I can have intimacy without losing myself. So it's welcomed, it's appreciated. Secure attachment really is an ideal. And there are a lot of folks with secure attachment, which is a wonderful thing. And they may lean slightly anxious or slightly avoidant, but in the grand scope of things, we really can experience secure attachment. For the anxious person, their reaction to intimacy is the non-compassionate way to say it, but how it's often phrased in the real world is they're needy or they're clingy. That's how it's experienced, where it's like, oh my gosh, I just can't breathe. They want so much from me. They're controlling, they're overbearing. So, for example, as a therapist, if anybody came into my office and described their partner that way, my mind would initially start to explore, okay, do we have an anxious avoidant situation going on here? And that gave a map about how to navigate these things. So the avoidant person, their reaction to intimacy is often to shut down, to distance themselves, and to intellectualize things. Because by intellectualizing things, you're disconnecting yourself from sort of the overwhelming emotional experience.
It's the opposite of intimacy.
Right, right. Yes, because intimacy really does require emotion. And if we've learned emotion isn't safe or emotion is smothering, well then we want to avoid the thing that doesn't allow us to breathe.
You know, I don't think of myself as a person who avoids intimacy, but I do think of myself as a person who lives in his head and overthinks everything. So rather than to have that genuine connection, I'm thinking rather than actually having. And so I think it can be really tricky to identify, well, I am put off, I'm not really able to have an intimate relationship because I can convince myself I am.
Sure. Well, and this actually speaks to something where there is not enough research with attachment theory, and that is kind of nervous system patterns and attachment theory. If we have a highly sensitive nervous system, even if we had a very secure upbringing, there's going to be a tendency of I need more space to regulate because my nervous system is so sensitive. And folks with high sensitivity in their nervous system tend to be more intellectual. And the reason is because there's so much internal activity happening within the brain. This is very measurable in a whole bunch of studies. And so I think that's just an important piece to add to this, that there's layers of distinction. Because Bob and I were talking about, you know, how much is nature versus nurture with attachment styles. And it really, really is both.
It really is. So we have been talking about the highly sensitive person. And I have concluded, you know, I'm 70 years old. After all these years, I've concluded that I am a very highly sensitive person. And it's got a really basic scientific explanation, like you said. A highly sensitive person just reacts more strongly to outside input, especially in childhood. So I had perfectly fine parents, but they weren't perfect. And so not having perfect parents sent me into a spiral of not being attached. And just because of how overly sensitive I was to my environment. So that, it's easy to say, well, it's the mother's fault. But if you're a highly sensitive person, then you're much more likely to go off, even with a good parent, a moderately good parent, into some of these less successful attachment styles. And I think that's what happened to me.
Understanding sort of layers of what makes us who we are is so helpful in navigating relationships. And one other thing that you shared about kind of intellectualizing, because I also am a highly sensitive person, and I actually do experience intimacy with others through intellectualizing. So there is something kind of interesting about that. I just want to throw that out there as a caveat and nuance, that while avoidant folks can intellectualize to create distance, you can't have a basis of intimacy based on intellectualization. The research on resilience is so powerful, and it actually speaks directly to attachment style. When you have somebody in your life that can model relationship, particularly if you have had more of the extreme types of abuse that would cause something like disorganized attachment, the more that there's somebody in your life to even show and model some secure attachment, the more likely you are to have resilience. Now, for folks who don't have that incredible fortune of connecting to somebody to have more of that bouncing back resilience, there is far more suffering. And that just goes to show how important it is to be kind and loving and supportive.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. We change each other's lives with all of our interactions. It's just incredible.
And just a little kindness can go to have a tremendous impact. Just a little kindness, tolerance, love, grace offered to someone can just utterly change their life.
Absolutely. And on the note of parent and parent blame, that's one of the things that as a therapist, I always wanted to avoid that. It's one of those things where it's so helpful to look at cause and effect. Cause and effect is the map of solving the mystery as to why I do what I do and why I feel what I feel. That's very different than blame and pointing the finger. It makes sense that if you had adverse childhood experiences that there might be anger and grief and frustration.
Sure. There has to be.
Right. It just makes sense because that is part of the cause and effect. If you get stuck there, you don't get to come into your full potential. And so it's important to have space and time for both. And that is all part of the process of moving toward more secure attachment, to grieve these losses we've had. And attachment theory is so helpful as well because we can map this through generations of family history and understand generational trauma. We can see, if my family came from poverty or oppression or whatever it came from, we can see how our grandparents and our parents coped and learned to trust or not trust relationships and how that affects us in present day.
Right. Now, I want to say something that I haven't got any backup for anywhere. I never read this or studied this. I mean, I like to be able to say something to you and know I can back it up, and I can't really back this up. However, I believe what I'm going to tell you is absolutely true. I am a follower of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I have been to thousands of AA meetings. I'm not an alcoholic. I've never been drunk, not once in my life. I'm not a member of AA. I can't be because I don't want to stop drinking. I don't drink at all, never did. But I have a lot of behavioral actions that I take that are certainly addictive and very harmful. In the 12 steps, I formed a secure attachment with a higher power. And I think that's the miracle of the 12 steps. I know no matter what, I am okay. I am always loved and cared about, and the worst things in life can happen to me, and I am going to be okay because there's someone who just absolutely loves and adores me and can take care of me and has proven to me over and over and over again through good times and really horrible times. That's a possible answer.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And how life-changing it is to have a secure relationship. Because in what you're sharing, and Bob, let me know if this fits, the secure attachment is, I am loved unconditionally.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I can make the worst of mistakes.
And I have.
Right?
Worst of mistakes.
And haven't we? So one of the huge takeaways I'm having from our conversation is the importance of secure attachment. And if it just doesn't feel that our life experience has allowed us to experience secure attachment with another human, it makes sense. You don't have to have all of the wonderful healing benefits. You can start with a higher power, just like Bob shared. And if that feels too far or distant, you can start with your pet. Dogs in particular are an incredible way to build secure attachment, to have unconditional, consistent love. Now, for some avoidants, you might find dogs to be overwhelming, so you can start with a cat. But then they might trigger your anxious tendencies because they're not necessarily all in.
I can't agree anymore. I think becoming securely attached to a pet is a huge thing.
What I want to leave you guys with is what healing looks like for each type of attachment. Secure is the goal. Secure doesn't necessarily need the healing. They are essentially the thing to aim for, is that secure attachment, that I can be myself and not lose myself and still be connected to you. And if the relationship is lost in the process, I might be really pained, I might be devastated even, but I will be okay. With anxious attachment, one of the core sort of focuses that can really help the healing is self-soothing. So self-reassurance, that connection to the higher power being really significant.
Or to a pet.
Or to a pet, absolutely. Really practicing a tolerance of space and distance, which can be really difficult to do. If you found that you related to the avoidant tendencies, what healing looks like for you is allowing connection and naming your needs. That can be huge, because if we're avoidant, we might not even know what our needs are. And if you do have disorganized attachment, what healing looks like in that context is really building a lot of internal safety and pausing on that reactivity of the foot being on both the gas pedal and the brake at the same time. It's almost like sitting with it, choosing safety, and really bringing a lot of awareness and emotional regulation to your experience. Well, Bob, I think that concludes sort of just a very broad overview of a topic that has so much depth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We certainly can't cover it in one video.
No, definitely not. In fact, there's wonderful channels out there. It's where I got a huge bulk of my own learning that probably has a good 35, 40 videos on every single style of attachment. And so we probably won't go that in depth here, but we definitely are going to dive a bit deeper.
So again, just becoming aware of attachment styles can be really truly life-changing and make your life so much better.
Therapy can be such a helpful resource with attachment styles. There's this material in this literature is taught quite a bit in a lot of graduate programs. So if you are searching for a therapist, you can say, do you have a background in attachment style theory? And that's especially helpful if you're doing couples counseling. I highly recommend that with couples counseling. And for the folks who don't have the resources to go to a therapist, ChatGPT, I know that might sound silly. I still can't believe how often I recommend it as a therapeutic resource, but you can ask ChatGPT. You can say, can you ask me questions to help me know my attachment style? Can you ask me questions that help guide me to secure attachment? And you're able to sort of process with artificial intelligence for free.
Yeah, that's a really, really good idea. At any rate, having this basic knowledge should really give you some directions to go and research to carry out and to examine yourself to see where you fit in. And knowing where you fit in, start to see, okay, this is kind of my tendencies. How am I going to start correcting them? So hope you got something out of this video. If you did, like us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, hit that thumbs up button, and we'll see you on the next video. Bye now.
Bye.